I'm Dan Callahan. I work at Mozilla here in the Twin Cities, and I'm going to be giving a talk on Persona, which is a federated authentication system that Mozilla is working on. So Persona, federated open source login system, which is just another way of saying that it's a way to log into sites that replaces per-site passwords. Persona works cross-browser, which means that it works everywhere for everyone. It's open, it's simple, and it's easy to implement. This is kind of awkward because I'm in the middle and the screens are on the sides. Please feel free to look at the screens instead of me. There's more interesting content out there. And I will just gaze at the sides of your faces as you turn your head. It'll be great. Anyways, so words are boring, demos are fun. Let me show you what Persona looks like. I've recorded screencast just so that the Wi-Fi doesn't mess with me. But here I am at Ting Mobile, which is a cell phone carrier on the Sprint network. And I use Persona, they use Persona. So when I click the sign in button, my browser shows me a list of all of my identities, all of my email addresses. Because identities in Persona are fundamentally email addresses, I can use anything I want here. I can add another address. I can choose an existing address. Because I used my Gmail account previously, that's pre-selected. So I had to click once on the sign in button, click twice to confirm my address. Wait a couple seconds, and I'm logged in. So Persona works and gives you that same great login experience on every site that supports it. The Mozilla Developer Network, 1 click, 2 clicks, and I'm logged in after a brief network delay. The great thing about Persona using email addresses for identities when it's doing login is that there's no lock-in to your backend. If your database already has email addresses associated with user accounts, you can switch to Persona today without making a single schema change. That also means you can switch away from Persona if in the future it turns out not to be what you need or not to be what you want. We're trying to build something that works pretty well for everyone, not just Mozilla, not just a couple of websites. Someone in the room is probably sitting and thinking, big deal, I can log in with 2 clicks with 1Password or with LastPass. But when I'm logging into this website, it's taking 2 clicks. It may look like a password manager. But Persona isn't managing passwords. Persona, by its design, fundamentally eliminates the need for any sort of shared secret between me and the sites I'm trying to log into. Which means if you were to dump 123Done's database right now and post it publicly on the web, you'd reveal my to-do list, you'd reveal my email address, but nowhere in that database is a shred of information even tangentially related to an authentication credential. The great thing about that is that if that were to happen, Lloyd, the author of 123Done, would have to send his users a pretty painful email telling them that the site's been compromised, their to-do list and their email addresses have been leaked. But he wouldn't have to tell them that in an abundance of caution, the next time they try to log in, they're going to have to reset their password. He wouldn't have to tell them they should probably go and reset their password on other sites, because compromising a site using Persona doesn't create collateral damage, because there aren't passwords stored in this database. A password manager can't eliminate passwords altogether. Persona can. The other great thing about not needing passwords to log into sites anymore is that you can actually skip over a lot of the pomp and circumstance of account creation. So here I am at slowblog.io. It's a blogging platform. And when I go to sign in, they use Persona too. I get this nice message that tells me I'm almost ready. There's no registration form. Just sign in using Persona, and you're good to go. So with 2 clicks, I could have a blog instantiated for me, and I could be up and running. No account creation step, nothing else. Choose an email address, click next, done. It's way better for your users. I'm not going to do this right now. But that's kind of an overview of what Persona looks like and what it works like for a user that's already used it. I did that in Opera. Of course, I'm with Mozilla, but we recognize that the web is bigger than any one company. It's bigger than any one browser. So Persona also works in IE, just the same, 1 click, 2 clicks. And I'm logged in. No plugins, no add-ons, no extensions. Persona is built on open standards, open technologies. It just works everywhere the web works. iOS, Android, Chrome. Persona is about the web. So during this talk, I want to tell you the story behind Persona, why I'm here, why Mozilla's here, what we're trying to do. I'm going to explain the protocol and how that works so that you can trust it. And I'm going to tell you how you can implement Persona on your own sites in just an afternoon. The story of Persona really starts with the story of Mozilla. And the story of Mozilla is enshrined in the Mozilla Manifesto. Mozilla is a nonprofit that was founded out of the ashes of the browser wars when corporations battling for control of the internet threatened to bifurcate the internet into incompatible proprietary fiefdoms. That seemed like a terrible waste of what had until then looked like one of the greatest public resources we had yet seen. And so Mozilla, with the help of the broader developer community, the broader standards community, the broader browser community, managed to break down those walls. And that mission, that drive, is enshrined in this 10-point manifesto. And I want to highlight two points from that manifesto, because it doesn't just apply to the web in terms of browsers. It also applies to the same sorts of walls that we're seeing spring up around mobile, around identity, around authentication. Point 2 of the manifesto is that the internet is a global public resource that must remain open and accessible. And again, we're seeing, thank you, fundamental challenges to that with walled gardens, closed ecosystems, proprietary systems. Point 5 in the manifesto, individuals must have the ability to shape their own experiences on the internet. This is spot on what we're trying to do with Persona, because what is more fundamental to shaping your own experience as a human than the ability to self-identify, the ability to choose how you identify yourself? So I want to go back in time about 25 years. This is a login screen from Prodigy from 1988. And you can recognize it as a login screen because it has those two text fields, ID and password, my username at Prodigy and my password. Fast forward to the present day. This is a conference I was at, PyCon, last month. This is the login screen. You can recognize this as a login screen because it has those same two text fields. Who am I? What's my password? So in a quarter century, what have we done? Along the way, we've realized that this isn't tenable, but we don't have a good solution yet. We've started trying to look at passwords as something that we don't want to handle, that are dangerous. Users reuse passwords. People don't use password managers, which means when LinkedIn got breached, every site that caters to professionals should have reset their password database too, because chances are people use the same password on LinkedIn that they used on other sites. It's human nature. People handle about 4 to 5 passwords with some minor variations. But how do we get rid of the password? We started giving people buttons. You go to a site, you can sign in with Google or Facebook. And if Facebook's invited, so should Twitter and Yahoo. Maybe Hotmail, it's still pretty major. But maybe I want developers or job seekers or gamers to log into my site. Maybe members of other social networks. And so and so this is what we've had, and it's kind of a problem. Because I show up at a site and I've got, on Stack Overflow, I think 13 buttons to choose from. And I have an account with 9 of those 13 providers. So the first time I land on Stack Overflow, how do I choose which provider to log in with? The second time I land on Stack Overflow, how do I choose that same provider again? How do I remember? But maybe it's worth it to get rid of passwords. Then there's this option. This is 500 pixels. They're kind of a Flickr competitor out of Canada. Very cool service. I feel bad picking on them, but their login screen, it's split in half. Divides your users into 2 classes. You can log in with Facebook, Twitter, or Clout, or you can use a username and password. So if I want to take control of my identity, if I want to use my own domain, or if I want to use an email provider like Google or Yahoo or Hotmail, because no one's heard of those, I can't click a button. I have to deal with a password. I have to not only deal with a password and the hassle that comes, or that imposes on me, I have to trust that 500 pixels is going to do the right thing, that they're going to be using a server salt, a per user salt, that they're going to be using something like scrypt, that they're going to keep updating the work factors for their hashing function. That's a huge burden. Or I could just accept this choice of Facebook, Twitter, or Clout. Show of hands, has anyone ever logged into anything with Clout or seen this before? I understand Clout. I didn't know that it was a login option. And so I clicked on it, and I could log in with Facebook or Twitter. So the future is very, very fractal. No, what? Like I would. There's no Google. There's no Yahoo. But this is what we've got. So there are user experience problems. There's user choice problems, user agency problems inherent with social login. But there's another side of it where by choosing to use social login, you're defining a specific set of providers that you're willing to accept on your site. And each of your users has to fit into that box of the terms of service governed by each site. And sometimes those sites don't want your users. Google and Facebook have real name policies. They will actively ban you if you use a name other than what's on your government-issued ID or other than something that you can back up with photocopied and faxed documents showing, oh, this is a common name that I use. And if you're running a business, is the price of not dealing with passwords, is that pain so great that you're willing to force all of your users to go through Google and that you're willing to give Google and Facebook a kill switch on your user relationships? But that's what we've got, and there's a lot of money in this business. There's a lot of money in having your brand in a login button across the web and seeing every single time someone at your domain logs into a website, seeing where they're going, when they're going there, gives you great information for targeting ads. And so if something's going to disrupt this ecosystem, it has to come from someone that's not trying to make a buck off of your every login. Again, Mozilla is a nonprofit. So we can look at this in terms of what's best for the users, in terms of what's best for the web, instead of what's best for an advertising budget. And so I try to think about what I hope the future looks like. It looks a lot like Persona. One button on the sites that supports any email address. That lets me choose who I trust. But how's it actually working behind the scenes? How is this actually any better than the social systems? The screencast I showed you at the start of the talk was what Persona looks like to someone that's already been using Persona. The browser knows who they are. It has their email addresses. So what I'm going to show you here is logging into a site that I've never used Persona before. I've never used Persona. I've never used this browser. At the Times of London crossword. When I go to log in, I get that same pop-up, except instead of a list of my email addresses, it has a text field. It says crossword.thetimes.co.uk uses Persona instead of usernames to sign you in. To sign in, please enter your email address. I have an email address. I know I have an email address. I know what the answer to this is. I can answer it. I'm going to type in dan@id.me, which is just a testing service that the Persona developers have built. And when I click next, you'll see that the browser actually goes out and says it's checking with my email provider. So it's going out to my email provider, ID.me, and saying, hey, ID.me, do you support Persona? And in the case of this demo, of course it does. ID.me makes it easy. It lets you use your account there to sign into sites like the crossword at the Times of London. Once you verify your account, you'll be signed in. So I click the sign in with ID.me button, and I get redirected to my email provider. So this is my email provider. I've seen this screen a million times. In this case, they're using a password to log in. But because this is hosted on their domain, my email provider can authenticate me however they want. Two-factor auth, they could send me a text message, they could have some sort of plugin and do a retinal scan. It's completely up to the site that I'm trusting my email with how I authenticate. So I type in my password, I click sign in, return to the Persona dialog, my address has been verified, some crypto happens in the back end. A few seconds later, I'm logged in, done. And now that my browser knows who I am and has proof of who I am, when I go to other websites, like again, 123 done, and I try to log in, I'll get that same two-click experience that you saw at the beginning. So I only have to sign in to my email provider once per browser, not once per site. So it dramatically lowers the user burden. So that's what Persona looks like for a first-time user. What's going on behind the scenes is that there are three parties. There's the browser, the Times of London, which is the site I want to log into, and ID.me, which is my email provider. the first thing that I did is my browser went to ID me and said, I want to log into somewhere. It doesn't say where. It's very, very privacy sensitive. It doesn't say where. It says, I want to log into somewhere as Dan at ID me. But to do that, I need some sort of proof from you, from my email provider ID me, that I am who I say I am. So I had to log in. I logged in, and what I got back was that same identity document plus my email provider's signature. This forms a certificate that I can store in my browser and I can reuse as many times as I want until it expires. So I only have to do this part once. Then when I go to log into a site, I present that certificate with another bit of metadata to prevent replay attacks, to prevent forging, that we bundle together into what we call an identity assertion. The identity assertion is what replaces the password. The times.co.uk has to verify that this is an authentic, it's a genuine document. It's like when you go to a bar and you get carded and you show the bouncer or the bartender your ID. They check, yeah, it's got the right hologram. Well, how does the crossword know what the right hologram, what the right signature looks like for ID me? Well, it goes and gets a public key. It's very basic public key crypto, 4 steps. But these two sides are completely decoupled. Getting proof of identity and using it to log into a website are completely separate processes. And step 4, where the crossword went and got a public key, that can be cached. So they're not even revealing to the email provider how many times their users are logging into a site. It doesn't tell them who's logging in. All that ID me can infer is that someone at their domain logs into crossword.thetimes.uk. No idea who, no idea how often, very privacy sensitive. It's also nice because if you're a web developer and you want to support Persona logins, you want to get rid of your password column, you only have to worry about these 2 steps: receiving the assertion, verifying it, logging the user in. So how does that actually work? It's extremely easy. Yeah. Sure. Aha.
What happens if you go to the Times and you say, oh, I'm logging with Persona, and you type in your email address, and it comes back and says, I don't know what this domain is, I've never heard of it before, or...
Good question. So what happens if step 1 here had failed? If ID me says, whoa, I don't understand this protocol. What you're seeing right now is a completely federated system. There's no central third party. I get to choose my email provider. I get to choose the site I'm logging into. I'm not having to trust anyone like I would have to trust Facebook or Google if I was using social auth. As a temporary bootstrapping measure, if your email provider doesn't know how to issue Persona credentials, you can actually fall back to Mozilla and say, hey, Mozilla, will you vouch for me? And Mozilla is willing to vouch for any address if you can click on a link that we send to that address. So we do normal verification that way, so it works for everyone today. And we're actually going one step further, and if you use certain addresses, like a Yahoo address right now, we won't even send you a challenge email. We'll actually use Yahoo's OpenID endpoint to verify your identity before we bootstrap the Persona credential for you. Yeah?
So let me ask you, if your ID password is compromised, does that give another user access to everything on Persona?
Yes, so if somebody can break into your email address, then they can, in turn, use that to generate a proof of identity that they can use on other sites.
And then how would this work on a public terminal?
On a public terminal, the credentials, the certificate that comes back in step 2, by default, is only valid for a few minutes to an hour. As you use it longer, we will eventually prompt you and say, hey, this looks like you're using this computer a lot. Do you want something that'll last a day or 6 hours? So we're trying to handle this with very aggressive expiration so that if you walk away from the terminal, if you log out, it'll get invalidated. But if you just walk away, there's a very, very limited window of opportunity for someone to attack you, which is, again, much better than the current situation where if anyone breaks into your email right now, it's game over anyways. But we get rid of passwords, which are just another Swiss cheese attack surface.
There's no step that points to Mozilla.org in any of those steps, but every time you click the button, the page that pops up says Mozilla.org and it has the URL.
Aha. So this is awesome.
Does that mean we're trusting Mozilla.org to know everything that we're logging into every time? Or
So the question is, the pop-up I was showing you was loaded at, let's see if I can scrub back to it, loaded at login.persona.org. That's because being able to do this protocol requires support from the browser browsers don't know how to do this protocol right now. So we have a JavaScript polyfill plus a central domain that will do this. You're still doing all the crypto client side, so Mozilla never sees your private key. And that's a temporary bootstrapping measure again. So the Firefox OS phones have Persona built in, so they never talk to a central Mozilla server. Firefox Desktop by the end of the year will have Persona built in. So it's actually possible right now to complete an entire transaction without ever talking to a Mozilla server. And the hope is that in the future, other browsers will build this in as well. We're going through the W3 and trying to get this standardized. Yeah?
It sounds awful similar to OAuth 2.
We're more focused on authentication instead of authorization. So these certificates, the assertions are only valid for a few seconds when you actually log into a site. It doesn't give that site any rights to go and get other data. You could still use Persona to bootstrap a login, then use OAuth to access siloed data on other sites. We're not mutually incompatible. Cool. So how do you implement it? One step, read the docs. developer.mozilla.org/persona. If there is one thing you take away from this talk, it's that URL. If you go to developer.mozilla.org/persona and you read the docs on developer.mozilla.org/persona, they will tell you to do 4 things. 1, include a JavaScript library. 2, hook up your login and logout buttons. 3, configure Persona. All these 3 steps happen on your front end in your templating language. Step 4, verify assertions. That's that signed crypto bundle that you get back. You have to verify that and then log the user in. It looks a lot like this. Script tag, done. That gives your browser support for Persona. Step 2, login and logout buttons. When someone clicks a login button, fire navigator.id.request. Clicks logout, fire navigator.id.logout. You don't need to pass any arguments to these functions. What you see is what you need. Step 3, configure Persona, id.watch. id.watch is the most complicated thing you'll have to do. On your front end, you have to tell it 3 things. Who's currently logged into your site based on your own session cookies. What to do in response to a login, what to do in response to a logout. So logged in user could look like alice@example.com or bob@foobar.test, or null if you don't have a session for the user. The login function, somebody's going to give you an assertion. You need to take that and you need to verify it somewhere that you can actually trust. So you need to send that to your backend for verification. So I'm going to use jQuery and just post it to /login on my backend. Just going to hand the assertion over. I'm not doing any computation. There's nothing magic about the assertion. It's a base64 encoded signed JSON blob. But just take it, hand it over. When you get done, reload the window, because in theory, that AJAX request is going to come back and set a session cookie. Or if it fails, just call logout to kind of wipe the slate clean and start over. Logout function, tear down the session, just like you're already doing with any sort of login system. Post to a path on your backend like logout, and then reload the window when it's done. That's literally all the front-end code you need to write. Yeah? Oh, yeah, this is just for brevity. All you need to be able to do is to accept this and then post it to your backend. So you can actually use standard JavaScript XHRs just fine. But you have to implement those 2 backend paths, a login and a logout path. Logout's really easy. You probably already have something that does this, but if not, that's a complete implementation. This is using Flask and Python. If somebody posts a logout, clear their session. That's all you need, 4 lines. Login gets a little more complicated. You can verify it all locally, but if you don't want to do the crypto, if there isn't a good library, you can actually send it to a central third-party service operated by Mozilla. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that assertion from the posted data. I'm going to tell Mozilla about that assertion. I'm going to tell Mozilla who I am. I'm example.com port 443. This is to prevent replay attacks. So we can say, yes, this person meant to log into your site. This isn't something that's being reused from another site. I'm going to post that to verifier.login.persona.org/verify. Along with this data. And the response is going to be JSON. And it's very simple JSON. You have to worry about 2 keys. Status OK, email, whatever. If status is OK, everything checked out. The signature's matched, the audience matched. You can log this user in as bob@foobar.test or whatever the email parameter is. So if status is not OK, I would abort. Otherwise, I'm going to create a session cookie and shove the user's email address into that session. Reload the page, done. Yes? there are plenty of libraries that'll do this. You have to write these 4 steps, or 4 steps I've just showed. You'll have to write or use a library that provides it. The verification stuff, again, you could either do crypto yourself or just send it to Mozilla, and we'll give you a nice little JSON blob. Not a lot. Like if you can do DSA keys and RSA keys and SHA hashes, you can do it. You need to be probably. It's all very, very plain, like run-of-the-mill crypto. So we're based on an early draft of some of the Jose standards, the JavaScript signing encryption. We're using a modified version of JWT and JWK for this. Yeah. We've diverged because that standard's still in draft form and has evolved in a way that's not compatible with what we got on board with. But once that gets through the IETF and gets standardized, we'll update our data structures to match. So anyways, you can do this 30 lines of code one afternoon. We've had actual people implement Persona in 20 minutes. And to prove it, I'm going to do it live on stage right now, which is a terrible idea. but I'm going to start with this Flask skeleton file. It's a Python file, just has some setup. Has one route, root, which renders a template that looks like this. What's on the template? Not a whole lot. If there's an email address in my session cookie, say you're currently logged in as email and give a sign out button. Otherwise, you're not currently logged in, sign in button. So that's what you see right there. This is all I'm starting with. Tiny Python file, tiny HTML file. And to prove that what I showed you is really all you need, I'm actually going to copy and paste the exact same code from my slides. So there's the include tag. Here are my login and logout buttons. Let's go create a script tag down here. Where'd that div come from? Let's repaste this. There we go. And then configure persona. So this is literally the code that I just showed you on the slides. Copied and pasted. The only change I made was that logged in user is getting set dynamically here using my templating language. So if session.email exists, I put that in as a string. And then I use just a JavaScript or to change it to null if it's not there. So write that. And I'll come to my backend, and again, copy out the logout session or route and the login route. Again, not a whole lot of code. Paste that in. This is using client-side cookies that are HBAC'd and signed. So it's the library I'm using has a secure cookie implementation. You can use whatever you need, just standard sessions. No. If cookies are disabled, then this particular demo will not work.
Suppose you could take the session key and pass it
Yeah.
on some other way.
Yeah, plenty of ways to do server-side sessions, which would work the same, just not this particular code. So the other change I made is that my audience is now localhost 5000 instead of example.com that I showed on the slides. No other modifications have been made to this code. I'll save that. Reload. Hit sign in. 2 clicks. Done. Choose other addresses. I could enter an address. Let's go use the Gmail just to prove it works. Done. So in a few seconds, and literally less than 80 lines of code, front end and back end combined, full site using Persona for authentication, no passwords. That easy. It's actually doable. So not only is Persona a great user experience, it's a great developer experience. So, thank you. Yeah.
Can that code be available with the slides?
Yes. I'm actually getting on a plane from MinneBar and going to Montreal. But when I touch down Montreal and find Wi-Fi, I will post this on my blog, and I'll have a link to that at the end. So before I go into questions, before I wrap up, I want to leave you with 3 tips if you're going to do this yourself. One is that you should use or make a library. It's very easy to do this when I'm using frameworks that are amenable to Persona, frameworks that aren't very opinionated. If you're using something like Django or Rails or a framework that has a little bit more of an idea about what a session should look like, what a user should look like, what authentication should look like, it takes a little more finesse to integrate CSRF handling, to kind of mesh the concepts of your framework with the concepts of Persona. So the easiest way to do that is to use a library or make a library, contribute back. That would be great. Step 2 is that if you are doing this yourself, please, please, please make sure that whatever you're doing actually verifies SSL certificates. Most languages standard libraries actually don't do rigorous checks by default. Nothing in the Python standard library by default will warn you if I throw a self-signed certificate for a completely different domain in the middle of your intended request. So make sure you're doing SSL, because the entire security of the system right now hinges on being able to fetch that public key securely, or being able to post that message and get it back from our verifier securely. And SSL is the best we have for that. And step 3, do something nice for your users. You can actually combine sign up and sign in. For an example, this is Voost. Voost lets me find and register for local cycling events. When I click sign in, I can choose from Facebook or Persona. Persona is not exclusive. When I click sign in with Persona, I get that same pop-up, but I'll choose an email address that I've never used on this site. My work address. I'll click sign in. And when I log in, Voost has never seen that address before, so they don't have an account. So they don't give me an error message. Instead, they give me a sign-up page and say, hey, wait a second. For us to continue, we need to know how old you are, what your gender is, and where you live, so that we can show you events in your area that you can register for. That's way better than making people split off into a sign-up or sign-in path. Just as another example, going back to PyCon last month, this was the form I had to fill out to create an account. 6 fields: email, confirm email, first name, last name, password, password again. If PyCon had used Persona, that's what the form would have looked like. Which would you rather put your users through? Which would you rather go through as a user yourself? So that's what we're trying to get to. I have a small request, and that's that you spend 1 hour with Persona. I've actually, at most of the conferences I've been to, had somebody implement it during the conference by the end of the day. If you are that person, I will potentially buy you a beer, not to entice you to do this, but just as a show of goodwill. I'll be around until about 5:30. But if you don't have a site, if you don't have a personal project to hack on, just go and log into a site that uses Persona. Jeff Atwood's new startup, Discourse, uses Persona for authentication, or at least it's an option. Go and give it a shot. Let me know what your experience was like. Let me know what worked well, what didn't work well. Because the only way we're going to be able to move authentication on the web forward is if the people in this room actually influence what that direction looks like. Because we can't do it alone. Another reason we can't do it alone is that there are a lot of sites out there that need to know that their users want this and are willing to use this. So even if Persona isn't exactly what you want right now, if you think we're on the right path, if you think there's hope in this direction, please email one site and ask them to support Persona. That's all I've got. Before I go to questions, I do want to give a shout out to the 2 folks on Creative Commons, or on Flickr, who published their photos in Creative Commons licenses. Thank you so much. Questions? Yeah. So most email providers don't support it. If I open an incognito window and go to 123.done and try to log in, I'll just use something random at gmail.com. It's going to go out and check for support and fail. And so it's going to fall back to Mozilla. Mozilla's willing to vouch for you. We ask you to create a password, so you don't have to do this every time. But I'll type in a password. Then Mozilla will actually email me a confirmation link at that address. I click on it. And then then Mozilla is willing to sign for me. So that's how we're getting around it. The nice thing is we can actually use public OpenID bridges. So if I say blah, blah, blah at yahoo.com and hit next, I'll actually get sent over to Yahoo. No new passwords, no checking my email. We're going to turn this on we're going to announce this for Yahoo on Tuesday. We're going to turn it on for Gmail by the end of the next quarter, and then hopefully Hotmail after that shortly. So pretty soon, hundreds of millions of users, well, hundreds of millions right now because Yahoo, but pretty soon about 1 billion users will be able to use Persona without any new passwords, without any new verification. So it fetches over HTTPS a JSON document that's at a well-known location, which is literally .well-known browser ID. Browser ID is the name of the underlying protocol. Persona is just a reference implementation. And that publishes the public key and says where to go to authenticate, where to go to provision. So if you want to support this on your own domain, you publish that JSON file, you publish these two URLs, and you can authenticate yourself. I'm currently in the process of doing it for my own domain because I've been a bad person and used Gmail too much. But it's not that difficult. Yes?
How do you see this integrating with NFC and YubiKey, other factors?
So the great thing is, because the authentication page is completely controlled by the domain you're logging into, if you have your own domain or you run, or you're running with a service that supports those sorts of things, it'll just work, or you can make it just work. Yeah, it has to happen on the provider side, which is kind of cool because it gives you a lot of flexibility. One of my colleagues, Shane, actually built a service that texts him a one-time password every time he logs in.
So next year, I think I had heard that the stand requests are only 0.3%. If someone were to fail to move to that, would it have a problem with the browser or other issues?
So the identity provider, the domain that you're deriving your proof of identity from, just has to be using a cert and a protocol that's supported by the browser that's trying to get provisioned. Yeah, you just have to worry about the browser. Questions on this side? No? More questions? You go with the white shirt first.
Revocations of signed certificates?
Does not exist. We're trying to avoid the quagmire of revocation just by dramatically limiting TTL on the certs that get issued. So again, public terminals, by default, you'll get issued a cert that's only valid for like 10, 15 minutes or so. Of course, if you have an active session with your email provider, it's very easy to go and re-up that. So we're trying to limit the window of opportunity and deal with it that way. Yeah.
If one were to remove all their cookies, what does it take for Persona to recognize you?
So we're storing the signed certificates in local storage. So if you clear local storage, then you don't have a cert, and you'll go through that same authentication process again. So if I try to log in, let's see, 1, 2, 3, done. So I don't have anything here right now. If I try to use Dan at id.me, it doesn't know who I am. I type in my email address. I go log into my email provider, and I'm done. So I just have to log into my email once again, and then it'll work. No, it's actually the provider themselves. If I can, too many build steps. So, for providers that don't support it, it's still Mozilla doing the fallback. So there are kind of two fallbacks. There's the JavaScript shim for browser support, and then there's the verification fallback. So we work with any email address right now. But the one caveat that's kind of wonderful is that any domain can stand up and authenticate its own users. Which meant that I built a service called mockmyid.com, which will happily vouch for anyone that asks. So you can't be guaranteed that you're actually getting an addressable, a routable address, but you are guaranteed that you're getting something that's either verified by Mozilla or vouched for by that domain. And if somebody's giving you something that they're not going to check, that's their own prerogative, and it's kind of the status quo. Sorry, did you have a question?
Can emails be spoofed with a site like that that's just providing the verification, but they don't really go and verify the email? So can we really believe the email address that's given to us?
You can believe that if the verification comes from Mozilla, you can believe that we have actually done a challenge response on it. If it's signed for by someone other than Mozilla, if it's signed for by that actual domain, you can trust that that domain actually believes that this user has that address. You can't be certain that the user will ever check that address or that their inbox will actually accept your message. But that's no different than the status quo today.
So you do get that email address, right? So you could always send off from your site a email to check.
Yeah, if it's absolutely critical that you communicate with your users over that, you would then have to do a second level of.
We should verify the email address ourselves, then, is what I'm hearing.
Only if that's actually crucial to your site's function. I mean, there are a lot of cases where, sure, I'd give you a mailinator address. I can go check that, but I'm never going to check it again. This doesn't change that at all. So it's something where if today you periodically ping the person to make sure they're actually watching their inbox, then yeah, you should keep doing that.
You could maybe even do like a temporary login where sure we'll give you access to our site for some rollout, for some basic stuff. And if you want to get more features, then you have to validate an email address.
I think we have time for one more question, and then
It still scares me if you have one email account breached, Persona's going to give it access to every email account you have.
I'm sorry, not to every email account, just to that one account. So if I
Okay, let me ask a question. If you authenticate your Hotmail account through Persona and you go to Google through Persona,
Mhm.
will it automatically give you access to the account since you're authenticated with Persona?
So there are kind of two levels. Right now, if your domain steps up and can vouch for you on their own, then everything is completely separate. So if I have a Gmail account and a Hotmail account loaded in, and somebody breaches my Gmail, they can forge my identity. They can log into sites as my Gmail address, just like they can today if they break into my email. We're not fixing that. But they don't get access to my Hotmail, so that's still secure. So it limits the collateral damage. But a lot of that relies on the email provider stepping up or us building bridges. And so that's where we're building bridges to the OpenID endpoints at Hotmail or at Yahoo and Gmail, and OAuth at Hotmail, which will be going live in the next few months. Cool. I think that's all the time we have before the next talk. I'm going to be around a while, so you can just find me outside that door in a couple seconds. But thank you all so much.